They were already pouring concrete by the time I got the call. It was 6:12 a.m. on a Monday when my phone buzzed with a message from my late grandfather's neighbor, Mrs. Helen Cooper. "They're building on your land, sweetheart. You need to come see this." Now. At first, I thought she was confused. Maybe construction had just strayed a few feet over the boundary line. But something in her voice, tight with urgency, almost shaking, made me sit up straight. This wasn't just a fence post knocked over or a few survey flags misplaced. By noon, I was in my truck, racing down the highway toward the old family farm outside of Pine Hollow, a sleepy town where nothing ever happened, until now. My grandfather, Henry Whitaker, had passed just 5 months earlier, leaving behind 200 acres of prime, fertile farmland that had been in our family for over a century. The deed had my name on it now. I'd planned to keep the land as it was, maybe even restore it one day in his memory. But as I crested the final hill on Route 19, my jaw dropped. Dozens of excavators, bulldozers, and cement mixers crowded the eastern fields, where Grandpa used to grow corn and alfalfa. Men in hard hats moved like bees in a hive, and giant banners flapped in the breeze. Coming soon, the orchards at Pine Hollow, 96 luxury homes, starting at $495,000. My chest tightened as I drove closer. This wasn't a simple mistake. I parked by the old barn and marched toward a group of people in branded polos and khakis, talking near a temporary site office. A woman with sharp features and perfect hair glanced at me as I approached. "Hi, can I help you?" she asked, not smiling. "You sure can," I replied. "Why are you building on my land?" She blinked. "This land belongs to the Orchards Development Group. They purchased it last year." I stared at her, stunned. "No, ma'am. This land belonged to my grandfather. And as of now, it belongs to me." That was the moment I realized something was deeply, dangerously wrong. The woman introduced herself as Elaine Markham, regional manager for the Orchards Development Group. She spoke with the smug confidence of someone used to winning arguments with a contract in one hand and a lawsuit in the other. "Your grandfather sold this land to us through a third-party brokerage," she said, waving toward a trailer nearby. "It was finalized over a year ago. We've got all the paperwork. Proper permits, approvals, everything." "No," I said firmly. "That's impossible. My grandfather would have never sold this land. He made me promise I'd keep it in the family." Elaine gave a pitying smile, like I was just another uninformed heir clinging to nostalgia. "I understand this must be hard. But legally, this land isn't yours anymore." I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked away, every step heavier than the last. Back at the farmhouse, everything felt eerily frozen in time. Grandpa's boots still sat by the door. His old flannel jacket hung on the coat rack. I wandered into his study, the air thick with pipe tobacco and old leather. The shelves were lined with binders and farm records. He had documented every crop rotation, rainfall, and tractor repair for decades. But what I needed wasn't about soybeans or irrigation. I needed to know if he really sold the land, and why no one told me. I opened every drawer in the filing cabinet. Yearly tax forms, weather logs, even livestock vaccinations. Nothing about land sales. No mention of the orchards. No contracts. No transfer of title. That's when I noticed a small framed photo of my grandfather and me fishing, crooked on the wall. I reached to straighten it, and saw something odd. The wood panel behind it was slightly warped. I tapped it. Hollow. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flathead screwdriver and pried the board loose. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a slim metal lockbox. I turned it over. Taped to the bottom was a key. Inside were documents, older than I expected. The original deed to the property, dated 1911. A set of survey maps updated in 1954 and again in 1982. A handwritten letter sealed in an envelope with my name on it. If you're reading this, then someone's trying to steal what I spent my whole life protecting. It was Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. He wrote about how developers had tried for years to get his land, offering checks, threatening lawsuits, and even cozying up to county officials. He'd grown suspicious when a man claiming to represent the county asked him to sign a document, just to confirm the access road. Grandpa didn't trust him, but the man kept coming back with new versions, each more vague and official looking than the last. I never signed anything that gave away our land. If they say I did, they're lying. Check the surveys. Compare them to the county records. The truth is in the maps, not in their mouths. I spread the maps across the dining table. The borders drawn on the 1982 survey showed something startling. Our property extended almost 80 acres further east than what current maps showed, right into the land the orchards was now bulldozing. The boundary line had been altered. I stayed up all night comparing Grandpa's maps with the county's GIS database. Sure enough, somewhere between 1997 and 2003, the official boundaries shifted inward. Our land, his land, had been quietly shaved down, piece by piece. The change was subtle, maybe enough to slip past a bureaucrat who wasn't looking. Or maybe someone paid them not to look. At dawn, I knew I needed help. I drove into town and knocked on the door of Harold Eastman, the only property attorney in Pine Hollow. He answered in a bathrobe, but let me in when he saw the stack of papers in my hands. He read the letter, then the surveys, then sat back and let out a long whistle. "If what you're showing me is legitimate," he said, "then not only is that land still legally yours, but this development may be sitting on a house of cards." I felt a flicker of hope. "But proving it will take more than a dusty map and a heartfelt letter," he added. "We'll need the original filings from the records office. And if there's any fraud involved, we'll need to find out who made it happen." My eyes narrowed. I remembered the polished tone of Elaine, the glint of entitlement in her voice. She wasn't working alone. No one gets away with stealing 80 acres of land without help. "I'll find them," I said. "Every last one of them." By 8 o'clock the next morning, Harold and I were in the Pine Hollow courthouse filing for an emergency injunction to halt all construction activity on the disputed land. Armed with Grandpa's original deed, the historic surveys, and a notarized copy of his will naming me the sole heir, we made our case to Judge Langston, an older man with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. He read through the documents twice, tapped his pen against his desk, and finally said, "I'm not ruling on ownership today, but I see enough here to justify pausing the development until we know whose dirt they're digging." By noon, the court order was signed. Construction on the orchards was legally frozen, at least for now. I drove straight back to the site and handed the injunction to a bewildered foreman, who reluctantly ordered his crew to power down. The cement mixers fell silent. The constant hum of progress stopped cold. Elaine showed up 20 minutes later, stilettos clicking against the gravel. "You're making a very expensive mistake," she hissed, scanning the court order. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." "I already have one," I said, getting into my truck. "Now you'll be hearing from mine." But I knew this was just the beginning. That evening, I headed to the county records office. If someone had tampered with the property lines, there had to be a paper trail. A sleepy clerk named Donnie eventually pointed me to the archives. Buried in a dusty filing cabinet labeled Adjustments 1990 to 2005. I found it, a boundary amendment filed in 1999. It reduced our land from 280 to 200 acres. The document was signed by Henry Whitaker, but the signature was shaky, like it had been forged by someone trying to imitate his handwriting. The date sealed it, July 19, 1999. Grandpa had been in the hospital that week recovering from surgery. He couldn't have signed it. Something stunk. Digging further, I found something even worse. The notarization had been handled by a Susan Markham. I took a photo of the document and drove straight to Harold's office. He narrowed his eyes. "Elaine Markham's maiden name is Susan. That can't be a coincidence." We pulled up the development company's incorporation papers online. The names listed on the board? Elaine Markham. Brent Callahan, the planning commissioner. Mark Holloway, the zoning director. And Susan Markham, listed as consultant. They weren't just building homes. They were building an empire, on stolen land. The worst part? The company had secured a $15 million development loan, using the land as collateral. My land? I leaned back in the office chair, stunned. If we can prove fraud. Harold nodded slowly. They don't just lose the development. They could lose everything. And I wasn't going to stop until they did. 1 week later, the Sunny Hollow Community Center was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled the hall, neighbors chatting with polite curiosity. At the front stood Diane Holloway, the poised and sharply dressed president of the Sunny Hollow HOA. Her voice echoed off the walls as she walked attendees through glossy slides of future amenities and luxury living enhancements. Behind her, a massive poster of Phase 2, 96 new homes. My land. I waited in the back, dressed plainly, a manila folder tucked under my arm. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. When Diane asked, "Any questions before we adjourn?" I stood. Just one. Heads turned. Diane's smile faded the moment she recognized me. "This isn't the forum for personal disputes," she said sharply. "I think the community deserves to hear this," I replied, stepping forward. "My name is Cal Whitaker. My grandfather owned the land east of this community for over 60 years. That land was never sold." People murmured. Some leaned in. Diane looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. I opened the folder and held up a yellowed map. "This is the original survey from 1911. And this one," I held up another, "is from 1982. Both show the property line extending 80 acres east of what's on file today." Then I placed printed copies of the forged boundary change and forged signature on the podium. "These documents were quietly filed in 1999 while my grandfather was in the hospital. The signature is fake. The notary? Elaine Markham, also known as Susan Markham, now part of the Orchards Development Group." Now the murmurs turned to gasps. A few people stood up for a closer look. I turned to Diane. "Your HOA is operating on land it doesn't own. And the Orchards? They're building homes on land they fraudulently claimed, using it as collateral for a $15 million loan." "Lies," Diane snapped. "This is a smear campaign. He's trying to extort us." "Then why is your personal home?" I pointed to her address on the map. "Sitting entirely on land that legally belongs to the Whitaker family?" Dead silence. From the crowd, a voice asked, "What does this mean for the rest of us? Are we trespassing?" "I'm not here to take homes," I said sincerely. "I'm here to stop a scam. To expose the people who've been fining you, intimidating you, and using your money for their own gain. Real quick, if you've ever dealt with a homeowners association that pushed too far, just comment the number 1 below. Let's see how many of us have been there." Diane's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this. You don't know who you're dealing with." I leaned into the mic. "No, Diane. You don't." As I left the stage, a young couple approached me. "We just bought lot number 42, the woman said, her eyes wet. "We sunk our entire savings into it. Are we going to lose everything?" "No," I said. "Not if I have anything to do with it." Behind me, Diane was whispering frantically to someone on her phone. The damage was done. The trap had sprung. The retaliation came less than 24 hours after the meeting. I woke up to the sound of diesel engines rumbling outside my grandfather's farmhouse. 3 black SUVs, all marked Sunny Hollow Private Security, sat parked across the end of the long gravel driveway. Men in reflective vests and earpieces loitered beside them, arms crossed, watching my every move. As I stepped outside, one of them handed me a thick envelope. "Cease and desist," he said flatly. "From the Sunny Hollow Homeowners Association. You're ordered to withdraw all claims or face immediate legal action." I opened the envelope. It accused me of fabricating evidence, harassing community leadership, and inciting civil unrest. They were threatening to sue me for defamation, obstruction, and even trespassing, on my own land. "You realize this is ridiculous," I said. The man just shrugged. We're just here to deliver paperwork and secure the site. But they didn't leave. That afternoon, I discovered they'd placed concrete barricades at the end of the driveway. My only route in or out was blocked. When I asked the guards to move them, one said, "Sorry, this access point hasn't been approved by the Development Committee. Safety regulation." I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded sympathetic, but offered no help. "It's a civil matter, sir. HOA disputes aren't criminal unless someone pulls a weapon." I hung up, seething. Then came the text from an unknown number. "Enjoying the view? D." A few hours later, a code enforcement officer showed up. Clipboard in hand, he walked the entire perimeter of the farmhouse, pointing out violations on everything from the porch railing height to the placement of the satellite dish. He handed me a list that would cost thousands to fix, immediately. By dusk, the water pressure dropped to a trickle, and the lights began flickering. When I called the utility company, they claimed it was routine maintenance and wouldn't provide a timeline for restoration. It was systematic, coordinated, deliberate. I tried to order pizza for dinner, something simple to lift the mood. The delivery driver called from down the road. "Sorry man, I can't get through. Someone put up cement blocks and said the area was restricted. You sure this is even your place?" That night, I sat in the darkened living room of my grandfather's house, no water, barely any power, watching the red and blue flashes of the HOA security vehicles outside. Then my phone buzzed. "Diane." I answered. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Cal. This is harassment." "No," she replied. "This is a warning. You sign over the disputed land, and this all goes away. We'll even throw in a little money to make it worth your time. You think this is about money?" She laughed. "Everything's about money. You've got 1 day to decide. After that, I call in the big guns." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, then out at the security lights painting circles across the old cornfields. Diane thought she could pressure me into surrender. What she didn't know was that the more she pushed, the more allies she helped me find. The next morning, I walked into town, exhausted but determined. I needed help, and not from lawyers or judges. I needed people. The kind my grandfather used to sit with at diner counters and hardware stores. The kind who knew right from wrong just by feel. My first stop was Mrs. Della Cooper, the neighbor who had first alerted me. She answered the door in a housecoat and curlers, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "I heard about the meeting," she whispered, ushering me inside. "They've been knocking on doors all week, trying to spin the story. I need to know who else they bullied. Who else might be willing to fight." She nodded slowly and handed me a yellow legal pad, already filled with names. 15 families, she said. People who got fined for flowers in the wrong pots. For putting up porch swings. For having too many grandkids over during the summer. For the rest of the day, I walked door to door. I listened to stories of cruelty dressed as regulation. A retired veteran fined $500 for a flagpole that was too tall. A single mom forced to remove her child's plastic playhouse because it clashed with community aesthetic. One woman showed me a letter fining her for painting her shutters off-white instead of HOA-approved beige. Some people were hesitant at first. But when I showed them the original property maps, and explained how Diane's crew had faked documents and buried the truth, they listened. And then, they started speaking up. "I'll stand with you," said Trevor Marks, who nearly lost his home after being fined into debt. "She took my rose garden," whispered Mrs. Patel, her hands trembling. "I won't let her take your land too." By nightfall, I had the beginnings of something real. Back at the farmhouse, I received a surprise visit from Gerald Knox, the HOA's treasurer, the same man who'd looked uneasy at the meeting when I dropped the old surveys. "I can't stay long," he said nervously. "But I brought something." He slid a flash drive across the kitchen table. "Years of financial records," he said. "It's worse than you think. HOA dues funneled into companies owned by Diane's family. Fake repair contracts. Overcharges. They've been bleeding this neighborhood dry. Why are you helping me? Because you're the first person who stood up to her, he said. And because it's time someone did. As he slipped out into the dark, my phone buzzed again, this time, a message from an unknown number. She fined us $1,000 for installing solar panels. We're in. The Martinez family? Another text followed. And another. And another. Diane had ruled through fear and fines. But now, the people she'd oppressed were ready to push back. And I wasn't standing alone anymore. 2 days later, we held an emergency community meeting, not in the HOA center, which Diane had locked up, but in my grandfather's old barn, now cleaned out and filled with folding chairs, lanterns, and resolve. Over 80 homeowners showed up. I stood before them with Gerald at my side. Behind us, an old bedsheet acted as a projector screen. I clicked through slides, financial records Gerald had uncovered, copies of overbilled repairs, shell companies linked to Diane's son-in-law. People gasped. Others cursed. She's been stealing from us? Someone shouted. For years, Gerald said. And now we can prove it. Next, I revealed the wetlands report, an environmental study my grandfather had commissioned decades ago and hidden in his files. It showed that part of the land the orchards was developing was federally protected habitat. This isn't just fraud, I said. It's a criminal offense. The final slide? A letter from my lawyer confirming the court had validated our original deed and boundary lines. The land was legally mine. All of it. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. The next morning, accompanied by county officials and the local press, I walked with them onto the development site and hand-delivered cease and desist orders to every contractor. Construction halted. Again. Within 72 hours, Diane Holloway was arrested and charged with fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying official documents. Her network of corrupt officials started crumbling, one resignation after another. For the first time in years, Sunny Hollow had no president, no fines, and no fear. The empire had fallen. De la Fan 8, Legacy and New Beginnings, 262, Fan Ket Suk Dong, Tran Ven, Mang Lai Kim Jiak Hoi Phuc, Gon Ket Song Dang Va Tun Vin Di San Qua Nue Ong. 1 year later, the fields were quiet again, but alive in a whole new way. Where bulldozers once roared, now stood community gardens, walking trails, and playgrounds built with local donations. The wetlands my grandfather had protected were officially designated a conservation area, complete with wooden signs explaining the local ecosystem and its endangered species. The HOA? Gone. In its place stood the Meadow Glen Cooperative, a new, resident-led organization based on fairness, transparency, and shared responsibility. No more arbitrary fines. No more beige mandates. No more fear. Sarah Jenkins finally painted her front door robin's egg blue. Trevor Marks built a porch swing and watched his grandson fall asleep in it. And Mrs. Patel? Her roses bloomed brighter than ever. I turned Grandpa's farmhouse into the community center he always dreamed of. Book clubs, craft nights, free tutoring for kids, it was alive with laughter and life. On the porch, his old rocking chair still faced the fields, and sometimes, I'd sit in it and swear I could hear his voice carried in the wind. One afternoon, Mrs. Cooper stopped by with lemonade and a faded photo of Grandpa standing in the same spot. He'd be proud, she said, handing it to me. I hope so, I replied, watching a group of kids ride bikes down the lane. No security trucks, no fences, no fear. Grandpa once told me, "The best trap isn't meant to catch. It's meant to reveal." Diane and her people thought they were building an empire. All they did was help me build a community. If you believe more neighborhoods should be built on honesty, not intimidation, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, standing up isn't just about you, it's about everyone watching. This story reminds us that the most dangerous thefts don't happen in the dead of night. They happen in daylight, hidden behind paperwork, polished smiles, and official-looking seals. What started as one man defending his grandfather's legacy became something much bigger, a community waking up to fight back against years of quiet abuse. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Don't be afraid to question authority when something feels wrong, especially when that authority hides behind rules that serve the few, not the many. HOA boards, city councils, even corporations, none of them are above the people they claim to represent. But it's not just about fighting. It's about rebuilding. When the truth came out, neighbors who once felt alone discovered they weren't. And together they built something better, something rooted in fairness, transparency, and respect. Whether you've faced unfair HOA fines, watched your town change without your voice being heard, or simply felt powerless in the face of bureaucracy, remember this: one honest person, armed with the truth and the courage to act, can change everything. Because justice doesn't come knocking on your door. Sometimes you have to go out and build it yourself. And if you enjoy true stories where the little guy stands up and wins, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more where this came from.